Agit Ner Shabbos, everybody. Welcome to Jerry's Corona Contemplations for Parshiot Vaera-Bo. I was traveling last week, so we're going to do Vaera-Bo together. They do flow very nicely into one another. The Aseret Hamakot, Yetziat Mitzrayim. This week's shir is dedicated Le'ilui Nishmas Dinas Bas Rav Yosef Halevi, also known as Bubby. Bubby, my grandmother on my father's side, Dina Aluf, she passed away in 2005. Her yahrzeit is Yud Gimel Shvat, so her neshama should have an aliyah. May she be a Melitz Yosher, Melitza Yeshara for all of us, for all of her family, for all of Klal Yisrael. When starting out learning Parshat Vaera, I think of Vaera-Bo, we're going to look at it as one unit, but the beginning of Parshat Vaera, as my daughter Shandi will tell you, talks about the Arba Lashonot of Geula. Vaera was her bat mitzvah parsha, and she will never forget, as she always reminds me, how I spoke at her bat mitzvah about the word sivlot. Sivlot. The Torah says, the parsha in the beginning of Vaera, v'hotzeti etchem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim v'hitzalti etchem me'avodatam v'ga'alti etchem bezroa netuya uv'shvatim gedolim v'lakachti etchem li la'am v'hayiti lachem le'elohim ki ani Hashem Elokeichem v'yadatem ki ani Hashem Elokeichem hamotzi etchem mitachat Shandi Sivlot Mitzrayim. And then it says, V'heveti etchem el haaretz asher nasati et yadi latet otah la'Avraham u'liyitzchak u'liyakov v'natati otah lachem morasha ani Hashem. One of the benefits of being a Baal Kriya is that you tend to memorize some of these things. I didn't even know I could do that. But it says twice, V'hotzeti etchem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim, and then it says V'yadatem ki ani Hashem Elokeichem hamotzi etchem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim. What does the word sivlot mean? Well, lisbol is a burden, the burdens of Mitzrayim, the burdens of slavery. But it's more than that. Ani lo yachol lisbol et zeh. Tolerate. I can't tolerate it. What does it mean, sivlot Mitzrayim? Not only the physical burdens, but to tolerate being a slave. Slave mentality, or as we call it more correctly, Galut mentality. The idea of being not in your own land, of not being in control of your own destiny, of being mamish a slave. Right? So Hashem says, I am going to cure you of this attitude, the whole idea of tolerating Galut and being, just under the thumb of another people. And this is something that has been plaguing Am Yisrael, not only in Mitzrayim, but for the last 2,000 plus years. The whole idea that we are not in our own land, right? And we have to do as others want us to do, not to be the masters of our own destiny. And Baruch Hashem, as we'll see shortly, the mere fact that we are in our own homeland and have our own army and have our own government, Baruch Hashem, is something that certainly the slaves in Egypt, but not even 100 years ago, 70 years ago, a little more, people weren't able to even conceptualize that this is possible. And it's something that we ourselves have to get out of our own heads. The whole idea of tolerance, of being a second-class people. And Baruch Hashem, we have come to a point in history where we're seeing this befall, that we're actually witnessing that others are coming to us to make peace for a change. And that is an absolutely wonderful thing. Now, let's look at the specifically five Lashonot of Geula, V'hotzeti, V'hitzalti, V'ga'alti, V'lakachti, V'heveti. So why are there 4 cups at the Seder and not 5? Well, Eliyahu's cup, Mashiach will come, will be brought to life. But, all right, that was very nice before 1948. Baruch Hashem v'hevesi. So there are pshat, there are people that say, Taka, you do have the fifth cup. But I heard something very beautiful, that v'heveti is part of v'lakachti. It really is arba lashonot of geula, but v'heveti lachem el haaretz is, you can't have one without the other. V'lakachti etchem li la'am v'ayiti lachem le'elohim, etc. V'yedatem ki ani Hashem Elokeichem hamotzi etchem mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim. Notice it says it again, sivlot. So in order to veheveti etchem el haaretz, we have to rid ourselves of the sivlot Mitzrayim, of the slave of the Galut mentality. And vilakachti etchem li la'am, you want to be part of God's nation, you want to be part of God's people, veheveti etchem el haaretz. It's not this and then that. They are, English, Hebrew. I'm like stuck between languages. But they're, what's the word? You can't, indispensable one from the other. Thank you. You can't have one without the other. There is no v'lakachti etchem li la'am v'ayiti lachem le'elohim without v'heveti etchem el haaretz. We are not full Jews without the land. And this is from the earliest part, when we were slaves in Egypt and God took us out of Mitzrayim to be his nation. He said, v'heveti etchem el haaretz. At that time. And Taka, we did 40 years in the desert. We're going to be talking about that for the next number of weeks until we came into the land. And we had to rid ourselves of the whole idea of tolerating being slaves. And when I say slaves, I mean not only to another nation, of course, but to our own desires, to our own Yetzer Hara, to know what it is to really be free in every sense of the word. And there's no such thing as a free person, Elamisha Osek Batorah, as long as we are involved in performing mitzvos, doing chesed, and learning Torah in Eretz Yisrael specifically, and even if one is not in Eretz Yisrael yet, then certainly to be pushing toward that goal. That is part of the whole idea of being removed from sivlot, the tolerance of Mitzrayim, of Galut mentality. No discussion of Vaera-Bo would be complete without touching upon the Esar HaMakot, the 10 Makot. I'm not going to go through every medrash that goes through how each one of the Makot were a midah keneged midah, the exactitude of Hashem's judgment against the Mitzrayim for what they did to the Jewish people, to Am Yisrael, but they starved them and made them thirst, ergo the Nile, and of course the Egyptians worshipped the Nile. Hashem hit their gods, small g, first. It devastated the economy in Egypt, devastated it. Their economy was totally based on the Nile, the Nile Delta. The frogs, of course, that they would scream at the Jews, and they weren't allowed to sleep, so of course they were given that. They weren't allowed to bathe. The Kenim, they acted like animals, therefore the animals treated them like animals. We could go through each one of them, but it was an exact measure for what had been done to the Jewish people over the past 210 at least years, right? And we could see that everything in the world is exact. And the Jews that were first slaves at the very beginning of the Shi'abud probably didn't know, couldn't have even thought about all the Makot that would be visited upon Egypt, and how they were left, when Am Yisrael left Egypt, they were left k'metzula she'ein bo dagim, like a trap that had no fish. There was nothing left. Egypt was laid completely to waste and barren when the Jews left, because there was nothing left. They did not enjoy one penny of profit from the slaves that they took, that they turned Am Yisrael into slaves, but they got absolutely nothing out of it at the end. All their gold and silver was taken by the Jews as payment for the years of slavery, and they took Egypt and completely emptied it. And we see that it does, in the long run, no one benefits from doing what Hashem doesn't want us to do. And we learned that from the Mitzrayim. They were given midah keneged midah, measure for every bad thing that was done to the Jewish people. They got back, and they were left as a completely barren nation after. It took like 500 years for Egypt to raise its head again after the plagues and Yetzias Mitzrayim and Ramses II. It was actually a very difficult period for Egypt. It took, like I said, about 500 years for them to come back to some form of their previous glory. But realize that no one prospers when they act not in accordance with the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Parshat Bo, of course, we have to consider and talk about Pesach Mitzrayim, that first night, the first Seder night. Now, though we have gone through the past year, and we've spoken about this a number of times, but we have to think about it in terms of where we are, where we've been locked in. In Israel right now, there is the third lockdown. And so we know what lockdown feels like. And the night of the Seder, the Jews were locked down in Mitzrayim because there was a plague outside, right? The Makat Bechorot. And we have been going through this for the last year. We have to really feel what it was like. Feel what it's literally been a year, more than a year, right? And what did the Jews have to do that night? They had to take the barbecue. They had to take the god, small g of Egypt, the sheep god. Now we spoke about the Nile god, and now they had to take the sheep god and barbecue it in the middle of the street, and they had to show perfect faith in Hashem, and not worry that the Egyptians would kill them for doing such a terrible thing. And not only that, they took the blood of this god, small g, and they painted their doorways with it to show, no, we serve Hashem. We don't care about your idols and your getchkas and all your garbage. We reject your society. That's the whole idea of mitachat sivlot Mitzrayim. We're rejecting your way in favor of Hashem's way. And because they did this, they were taken out, and it was like lightning fast. They were slaves 1 second, and the next second, the Egyptians were throwing their gold and silver at them and saying, take everything and get the hell out of here. From being slaves for hundreds of years. And we see how fast things can turn, Rabosai. What's the underlying message here? I spoke about this last week, and I'm just going to mention it again. Until a couple of months ago, everyone thought, oh, Trump's going to win again and he's going to be president. Everything will be great for the Jews and be great for Israel. And in 1 second, we see Hashem could say, not so fast. Not so fast. Whether you agree or you disagree or you liked number 45 or you didn't, that's not what this is about. What this is about is showing how Hashem can turn things around in the blink of an eyelash, whether for better or for worse. That's not the point. In this case, in the case of Egypt, they were slaves, and a second later they were free. And we saw earlier, when they came into Egypt with Yosef, they were at the apex of society, and Hashem snaps his fingers, Kaviyachol, guess what? You're slaves. And then you're out. And that's how fast, Rabosai, that's how fast Hashem can turn things around. Look, it was a year between the first plague, blood, until Makas Bechoros, approximately a year. By the end of that year, 4/5 of the Jews in Egypt wanted to stay. Because after the first plague already, most of the Egyptians were afraid the Shibud stopped. Right? They weren't free to go, but they weren't forced to work anymore. So now they're saying, hey, we could build the Nile Delta. Wow, these are fertile grounds here. We could build a beautiful society with shuls and beis medrash, and then why should we leave? Everything's great here. Hashem said, I said, v'lakachti v'hevesi. You have to, if you're not going, you're gonna die here. And they did. 4/5 of them decided not to leave. They didn't want to go. And they died in Mitzrayim. 20% of the Jews that were alive before Makas Choshech, 20% of them left. The rest of them stayed in Egypt in the ground. And again, remember, v'lakachti etchem li la'am, v'heveti etchem el haaretz. You can't have one without the other. Keep that in mind. So even if you're not in Eretz Yisrael right now, know where you have to focus your attentions, because no one wants to do the big role. That's why Yaakov didn't want, Al natik bareni b'Mitzrayim. Think of Parshas Vayechi a few weeks ago. Al natik bareni b'Mitzrayim. Please don't bury me in Egypt. I don't want to end up there, is what Yaakov told his sons, he told his children. And the ones that listened understood the juxtaposition of v'lakachti and v'hevesi, and how important one is and how you can't have one without the other. So we've seen in the last year how we could be in a plague and locked down like they were the night of the Seder. We see how the fortunes of Am Yisrael could turn on a dime on the head of a needle from one second to the next, and how people may have been very secure in their position a few weeks ago and now are thinking, maybe I really need to make that call to Nefesh B'Nefesh. Shabbos Makara Bracha. Ein Yisrael Negolan Ela B'Schus HaShabbos. This is the week of Yitzias Mitzrayim, Parshas Bo. We were Ilu Nasan Lanu Es HaShabbos. We're going to say it the Seder in a few weeks, right? Without the Hashem took us out of Mitzrayim for the Ein Yisrael Negolan Ela B'Schus HaShabbos. Shabbos Makara Bracha. That is how we show Hashem we're part of His team. So everyone have a good Shabbos. Those of us in Israel, we're locked down, so there's no rolling, as Walter would say. So again, a beautiful Shabbos, Parshas Bo. Talk about the Geula, talk about personal Geula, about how we get out of ourselves and how we get out of our bad habits and free ourselves from our own addictions and our own bad traits. They're bad, but things we can improve on. And let's spend time thinking about that on Shabbos. L'kra Shabbos l'chu v'nelcha. Let us go and enjoy a beautiful Shabbos, Rabbosai. Thank you for joining us. Next week, Kriyas Yamsuf, Be'ezrat Hashem will be able to get it in. B'Shalach, yeah, I think B'Shalach gets its own, and Yisro, we got some good ones coming up. So join us back here next week. Thank you for joining us. Have an absolutely wonderful and meaningful Shabbos. Shabbat Shalom.